All right, welcome back to Design Huddle. We have Mustafa back in studio, and by in
Woohoo.
studio, I mean our makeshift work from home offices. How are you feeling?
Yeah, no, oh my God, I was so sick. It wasn't COVID, but it was COVID-esque. And you do that with children and during a vacation that you've been waiting for ages. Yeah, it's a total cluster. Beep. But I see you've
It's,
been busy interviewing the world.
yeah, no, trying to keep the podcast crawling up the rankings. Did you see that I
Yeah.
posted some of the spots that were popular? I said we should move the studio to some of those other countries that appreciate Design Huddle. We were like the number
Yeah, well, I
five
mean,
and number six podcast in other countries, so we,
well,
we
you
need to
say
get
that. I
away
mean,
from the UK and US audience.
yeah, I mean, you say that. I mean, I think we've spoken about this ages when we first started doing this together, which may be the theme of this podcast, of this episode. There was a dating site in New York that was pitched at the Hasidic Jewish community, and and so it had all like the chaperoning, and it was like designed for that community.
Yeah.
But it didn't really take off. But then they started seeing a huge following in India because they follow in India is very conservative as well, and they follow very similar traditions. And so they rebranded the site and they moved the offices to India, and it became a really successful dating site. So,
Yeah.
so
The-
who knows? Maybe this time next year we could be in like Bangladesh or something. I don't know.
yeah, there's a phenomenal TED Talk that basically went through like all of the for the unicorn startups that basically like rose to fame. Think like Uber, Airbnb, etc. And it kind of went into the dynamics of what makes them like successful. And like the number one most important one was like a team. So like being a team that has like the flexibility to kind of pivot. And the other one was one of the other top five elements was just like straight up timing. Was it just like, is this the right time for the
Yeah,
company or product or service you're building right now? Because if the time it could be the best idea in the world, but if the market's not ready for it or you're late, like it's a missed opportunity. But
yeah,
that's
it's
funny.
true.
We'll have to figure out the name of that company and see how they're doing now. But I'm not
I'm.
surprised that it worked because they had all
It'll
the
probably.
tech in place, right?
Yeah, it'll take me 10 minutes to probably search one, but yeah, the whole podcast you just like, yeah, it's tapping on the keyboard. Um, but yeah, no, another example. I remember one of my uncles was telling me his friend tried to set up a, a travel agency, but all online, like about 5 years before it will happen. And he spent so much money to get a custom built thing. And at that point, I think it must have been late 90s. People just were too reluctant to use their credit cards with a computer. There was still that fear of I don't know what's going to happen and lack of trust. And it
Actually, I had a
obviously
question.
failed.
What do you think changed? Because I think about that a lot, right? We went from like people being terrified to putting their credit cards into the internet, and now it's like people throw it around like no problem. Do you think it's just like the custom? Sometimes I think it's like the comfort of like the customer service of certain like American Express. Like if I have a fraudulent charge, like they reimburse me, they dispute it, and they're really good at kind of like making sure that everything is resolved. But for me, it's always been like generational, where it was like I never had a problem with it. But I remember my
Yeah,
parents for a long time like refused to like
I
put a
think there
credit
was,
card in online.
from my understanding, there was always, well, in the UK anyway, there was always laws that protected the customer from some kind of, especially with credit cards. Debit cards is a bit more problematic because that's basically you're using your own cash, but
Right.
credit cards is someone else's. But I think when credit card companies started ramping up advertising saying that your money is protected, then people felt a bit more comfortable. And I think in the early 2000s in the UK in particular, like that was a big part of like you're protected by, you'd always see that word around. And I think it's a generational thing as well, probably, is people um, like credit cards in the 80s was a sign of, as a status symbol. I remember it's like, what was like Dallas and all those big the American TV shows. So I think once the early 2000s, where credit cards were much more abundant, especially amongst younger people, probably that fear. Um, and also they grew up with the technology, so that was like the way you buy things, rather than some archaic going to a store making this thing come to you. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, but then even with payments, that flow is very unique to certain countries. I think we've spoken about this before, but
Yeah.
like in Brazil and Turkey, where you pay the courier, like the person who delivers the stuff to you rather than online. And there's other things where you pay and then you get the thing to deliver to your house. Like supermarkets do this, like, you know, which is a quite weird thing. You go to a supermarket, you pay, and then you get it to come to deliver to you rather than you just taking your grocery shopping home, because it's like you're carrying your work bag or something, so you're being lazy, or it's just too heavy. So there's so many different payment flows, or SMS. But yeah, no, I find that payment evolution, especially the cultural thing, very interesting.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Design Huddle. The opinions expressed are solely our own and do not express the views or opinions of our employer.